Welcome to our Discussions with Mercy Leaders. I'm Edie Magnus. Today, our conversation is how technology is transforming education, parenthesis, and making all of us crazy, end parenthesis. And we are featuring several of our faculty members from our School of Education. We're very happy to have them, as well as a principal from a school in New Jersey. So we're going to get to all of that. There are lots of issues. There's teaching in the virtual world and with technological tools. There's learning in the virtual world. There's the perspective of parents and teachers and administrators. And just a little housekeeping, this is being recorded. So if you want to see this later or you want to share this with someone, we'll be putting this up and you'll have the opportunity to do that. And you are muted. I put a little note in the chat room. You're muted when you come in, but if you have questions, just put them in the chat and we will see them, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. So we always start our conversations just sort of getting a sense of the audience with a couple of poll questions. So that's what we're going to do first. And the first question we have is, how difficult or easy is it to use distance learning technology, computers, tablets, Zoom calls, learning applications, whatever? How difficult or easy do you find it? Very difficult, difficult, easy, or very easy? Wow, that was a fast answer. And the second question you can see right there, are you satisfied with the distance hybrid learning opportunities either in your school or your child's school? So, okay, I have to say, just for a quick swashbuckling answer there on both of those, they both surprise me. We'll give it another second or two, but 67% of you say distance learning and figuring out all the technology is easy. And another 33% say it's, but there's nobody who says it's difficult or very difficult. I'm very surprised with that. And 100% of you are satisfied with the distance hybrid learning in either your school or your child's school. And I gotta say, I'm very surprised with that. I'm pleasantly surprised, but wow, I thought we'd get a lot of no's or dissatisfaction reflected there. So, okay, that is our sense of the group. And we have, as I said, we have 4 people who are joining us to talk about all this. And so first I want to introduce all of them. Theresa Quackenbush is here, and Theresa, just wave for anyone who's looking at the gallery view so they know where you are. There she is, my upper left, who knows, on your screen. She has been with Mercy College since 2007. She was an adjunct and then joined the full-time faculty of the Childhood Education Department in 2016. She is also an alumna of Mercy College. She earned her MS in Childhood Education. And she is currently getting a doctorate. She's in the Higher Education Leadership Doctoral Program at Manhattanville College here in New York. So she's with us. Dr. Patrick Mccabe is with us. Patrick, if you don't mind waving too. He is a full-time associate professor of literacy at Mercy College. He's taught literacy courses for any number of years with a particular emphasis or an interest in self-efficacy and literacy development. He has taught at the elementary and secondary levels in New York City's public schools, and he was responsible for a literacy program at Rikers Island Correctional Institute in New York City. And Christine Lang is with us. Christine, wave if you would. She is an associate professor of special ed. She is the chair of the special education department here at Mercy College. She is board certified in behavior analysis, also a licensed behavior analyst, and she specializes in autism spectrum disorders, emotional and behavioral disorders, ADHD, and developmental delays. And so we really want to try to do a deep dive there, Christine, on how children with special needs have been helped or not helped in this COVID environment. And finally, Benjamin Soro is with us. And Benjamin, if you would wave too. He is currently the principal of Dwight Morrow High School and the academies at Englewood in Englewood, New Jersey. So he is our resident administrator and can tell us all about lots of things, but can also, I mean, particularly like what goes on in the front office of schools and how they're dealing with going out, coming back. And so welcome to all of you, and thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. So Theresa, I'm going to give the big 10,000 foot, thoughts on the last year question to you. Can you just share some initial thoughts on the impact of technology on learning in the age of COVID?
Sure. I recently had a conversation with a colleague about that, and we were talking about Zoom fatigue. And I replied, you know what, that's true, but I'm so glad that we have the technology so that we were able to stay connected and provide access to our students. In some cases, we've been able to provide additional access. But coupled with that, it's allowed us, I think, to really re-examine our practices. And it's parallels with best practice in the classroom of how do you not just provide access, but how do you provide meaningful interactions? How do you cultivate a culture of community online? How do you involve your learners, assess in an ongoing way, and get your learners invested? So, in some ways, it's helped us hyper-focus on that, because the proximity to the learner, oftentimes we can assume that because we're there and we're teaching, that they're getting it. And the hybrid or even the fully remote model has allowed us to stop and take pause of different ways that we can really, really build those interactions. And it's not just one teacher and one environment now. We're trying to balance multiple environments because our learners are coming to us from multiple environments. So I think it's really been, initially it was arduous, but I think it's reminded us to really reflect on our practices, our instructional design and delivery, and how we can maximize those interactions and those connections for our learners. And I'm grateful for the technology this year because I thought about it and I've said, we've provided online learning for our students for many years. And I've held myself accountable here where I've thought maybe these were some things that I should have been doing sooner. So we've garnered a lot of teachable moments from this. And I really look at it from a lot of silver linings that we've taken away from this. And then how can we grow from that and continue to provide that access and equity and education and really what that looks like to serve diverse learning needs.
So there was a lot in that answer that we're gonna come back to and take that apart a little bit. But Patrick, let me ask you, what do you think has been your choice, the biggest challenge, the biggest advantage, the biggest opportunity, however you might want to characterize it, to the sudden shift to virtual learning?
Yeah, I agree that in-person learning is the best. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to take that back. I think in-person learning is very valuable and is good, and I'm going to use the word good purposefully. But I think Zoom has major advantages over the in-person learning in a couple of ways. And it has to do with the Zoom features. For example, personally, I just love, capital love, the breakout rooms in Zoom. And they are really good. I mean, when you are teaching in a classroom, or at least when I'm teaching, or when I'm conducting a lecture or having a discussion in class, I can break that group up into smaller groups, and I can go visit each one, and it's a better one-to-one interaction in that sense. And it's private. It's not usually all of us when we do it in the classroom, everyone's listening to everyone else, on purpose or not. They hear everyone. I guess hear is a better word. But in the Zoom room, you don't hear the other rooms. You just hear your room. And I think that's a very, very valuable feature of Zoom and platforms like Zoom. And Zoom is very good, but there are platforms, like Zoom. But so I'm happy. I mean, I like Zoom a lot. I think it has a lot of great features that the college should, any college or to any school, Benjamin, ought to kind of consider strongly as an advantage over the in-person learning. So, and the chat, for example, is another way, and the poll is another way to get feedback from the class. And the screen sharing is wonderful in two senses. It's wonderful because I can share a screen with the group, and I can allow the group to share the screen, and in the rooms they can share screens with each other. And that's a really good feature. It gets students to allow students to become involved in the lesson, in the session, and for you to, for the instructor to monitor it and see how it's going. So I'm a big fan of Zoom. I mean, I don't want the in-person to go away. And I do get, as Theresa said, fatigue. I get zoomed out or zoned out or something. But yeah, I think it has a lot of very good features. And anyway, the world was going in that direction beforehand. So the unfortunate, circumstances we are in now, which hopefully we're getting out, but anyway, just kind of pushed it forward. We were all moving toward that prior to Zoom. But now with the pandemic, it was accelerated. The pace of adaptation of the technological distance learning is accelerated. And the other thing, of course, and I'm going to stop after I make this statement, is of course, you can get students from different parts of the college can get students from different parts of the country. A high school can get a student from Rhode Island who wants to take a course at Benjamin School, or Benjamin can send a student to Rhode Island to take a course in one of those Zoom-sponsored schools. So it has a lot of advantages, and I think it's a very I think very positively about it. So I wasn't quite that surprised, Edie, in the answers to the poll. Yeah, I kind of see it. The problem is, and I said I was going to stop, but I really am going to stop after this. The problem is the access for a lot of students, and the separation between, again, the haves and the have-nots. And so many kids don't have access to the internet at home, and so many kids have access to the internet just through the phone. So that's an issue, but that's an issue of delivery. It's a delivery issue. Okay, I'm stopping.
But it's not, well, yes, it's a delivery issue, but, and so first of all, I want to make a distinction here because it's interesting when I hear you talk about students. Our School of Education is teaching the teachers, the future teachers, right? So I'm interested in how the technology has impacted how you teach the future teachers to teach. But the inequity problems, they are teachers' problems, right? I mean, there you are with a classroom, and not everyone can pay equal attention. Not everyone has the same resources. Theresa, let me ping this back to you for a moment. What I mean, is there anything that teachers can do to address this issue?
Well, I want to address what you just said about we're training our practitioners to go into the classroom in this climate, right? And the landscape has shifted, and we do hope, like Patrick says, it shifts back. And I think I see that happening with in-person learning, but still preserving all of the hard work, right? Because if we've learned anything this last year, it's how unpredictable the world can be. So that way we're better equipped and to do this. But it's interesting, before the pandemic, I would always tell our students, and particularly when I would go in and observe them in clinical practice in the classroom, that technology is really important supplementally to reinforce learning, but do not allow it to replace the process of learning. And I saw a lot of that going on the last few years. Then the pandemic came, and we're basically saying, this is your modality to deliver instruction, right? So in that capacity, we really had to train our teachers the best way and how to equip them to do that, but yet still maintaining that can't allow the process, replace that process of guided practice, of peer interaction, of checks for understanding, of progress monitoring, and how do we cultivate that and do that in this virtual world? So I think, what Patrick said is right. Learning is relationship-based, and in-person learning, I think, will always supersede virtual world, but there is an equity issue. But I think what I was saying earlier, this has highlighted that equity issue and access. And I think it's allowed us to take a step back, and many capacities, we've really noticed that again, and more so, and it's reminded us the inequity. And what happens in situations like this is already marginalized communities really suffer. And so I think that's really helped us sort of evaluate that and to think more deeply about how we can provide that access and how we can be more collaborative in doing that. But did I answer the question, the second question, Edie?
Well, because I really want to understand this. And Benjamin, let me bring you, so you have kids in your school, and I don't know how much disparity of access resources that you see, but do you have a perspective on the sort of social equity challenges posed by having all of these, having this reliance on digital tools and virtual technology?
So yeah, so I was really surprised when I saw the poll because I really thought everyone was like, no, this is really bad and it's not good. And you know, as a principal who has 1,200 kids in the school and urban students and suburban students and students from all over northern New Jersey and different populations within the students, I get a chance to see the whole picture on a daily basis. And you know, when it comes to access, you know, we basically went from an in-school setting to a virtual school setting in 72 hours. And, you know, we weren't a one-to-one school at that point. We were one-to-one. Kids got the laptops at the beginning of the day and they returned them at the end. But, you know, even before that, we were saying, well, you know, the students who may not have Wi-Fi at home or laptop at home, we're doing them a disservice. That's not equitable. So, you know, actually going into the pandemic and then going into virtual learning forced us to be more equitable with our practice. Made us really take a look back and say, are we serving all of our students to the best of our capacity? And you know, honestly, in every aspect, whether it be technology or just pedagogy, teaching and learning, it put everything on its head and made us take a step back and like, wow, what are we doing? Are we doing it in an equitable way? Is it a fair way? Do all of our students have access to the resources they need to succeed in a classroom? So from the equity standpoint, yeah, it was very, we had to take a deep look and be very reflective and understand that we weren't doing best by our students. We really weren't.
And in fact, you know, like the School of Education, our School of Education, Theresa made a good point. We've had online learning. I mean, we've had it for many years, actually. And so the adjustment for students learning to be teachers may not have been as dramatic as it was for high schools, where some of those teachers never taught virtually before, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And you know, I have a good range of you know, veteran teachers and new teachers, and it's been crazy. You know, like, you know, even the technology piece is great. I agree with everyone. It's great to have it, and you know, you have your laptop in front of you all the time, and you can learn and interact. But there is fatigue with it. There's absolute fatigue with it. I think everyone is just kind of virtual learning out right now, and you know, I just think that, you know, within, you know, March till now, a year, we had to provide so much professional development for our staff to be able to use virtual learning in a good way. Because to be honest with you, again, as a principal, I'm just going to be honest, virtual learning is nowhere near as effective as it should be for my high school. It's just not. As much as we would like it to say it is, I am not happy with it. I know my teachers are not happy with it. And, you know, it's almost like we have to go back to school to take a look at, you know, how can we be better educators and administrators in this virtual world, because to turn it on 72 hours worth of information and trying to work with contract and PDs and all that stuff, we have a long way to go with virtual learning.
So do you subscribe? There's a lot that's written about concerning the loss for students. You know, third graders have lost 3 months, or sixth graders have lost 6 months of, you know, math or English. Or do you see it being reducible in that way to, like, you know, sort of quantifiable losses in whatever grade they're in?
You know, quantifying stuff is hard right now because in March we did not have the state testing because we were virtual, and right now the New Jersey DOE is trying to find out if we are going to have testing or not. I believe New York said yes to state testing, so that's going to put pressure on us to have it. And, you know, we want to talk about measurable. I don't know how my kids are going to do on those tests. I really don't.
I mean, do you think it's a good idea to throw those out for a little while until we get back on our feet? Or,
I mean, everything is data-based, right? We try our best not to be subjective, but objective, and we use numbers. I do think that there should be testing. I think there should be a way for us to see where we're at and, you know, where we're going. Are those numbers going to be pretty? They're not going to be pretty at all, right? So you're talking about a brand new virtual learning environment for everyone. And, you know, it's going to take time if we're going to continue with this to address everyone's learning needs in the best way. I do think that the best format for this is to continue to offer professional development for even parents, right? Being parents in a virtual setting. But, you know, it's going to take time. And one of the things I'm hoping for the fall is that we do a hybrid setting, because I think there are some things that are great in the virtual learning, environment. And I do also believe that there's some components that are even better in person.
So Christine, I'm coming to you, I promise, but there's one question in the chat, which I know Theresa has also sort of highlighted for us is an issue. And that is, the question here is, what effect does technophobia have on students and teachers? And really it's everyone's confidence level, right? Being able to teach virtually, being able to learn virtually. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I have to, though, add two little points. When you mentioned earlier, as teacher trainers, right, we are trying to prepare our practitioners to go into the classroom. And now we're not just in higher ed, we have that one population, so to speak, diverse learners, but one population. We're trying to train teachers to go in across the scope of K-12, which is how that learning looks online is very different. So maybe a middle school or a high school, their time on task is very different than a K-4 student. So even the most effective online teacher looks like, whatever that is, it'll reach a certain level of effectiveness based sometimes on the age of the child, their time on task. But the other piece of this, which I think is another lens to look at this through, is this. There's been a lot of rhetoric about learning loss. And as Benjamin said, I don't know how much we can measure that yet. And anytime we shift landscape, we shift with the way we think, they'll typically be attached some type of language like that and fear. But I also think it's allowed us to pause to look at the curriculum, right? Because when we look at curriculum, placement and pacing and progress, I think, we're looking at this learning loss against existing benchmarks, which may or may not have been developmentally appropriate. So I think on the higher national landscape that we look at that when we have that conversation. But phobia, yes. So in thinking about this conversation tonight, I tried to think, first you have to understand what online learning is not. Right. And what does it look like for both the instructor and the student and that relationship? And it's really a partnership, and there's isolation for both the instructor and for the student. And so again, how do you cultivate that, and how do you create, investment throughout? How do you create norms of interaction online? Because the self-efficacy of the instructor, if they feel that they're not prepared, if the student doesn't feel prepared, right, and we're not setting them up for success, there's a lot of trepidation with engaging in that community. So it really goes back to training, professional development, practice, modeling, and then really, I know it sounds like a catchphrase, but really cultivating that community in your online class. And I think starting small and those small steps and building those relationships will really yield a big impact. Because there is, and we have to be mindful and be aware that there is fear and that there is a phobia, and look at that. It's not just reading lectures. It's not just reading PowerPoints. It's not just giving assessments, but it's really creating peer interaction, student to teacher, small group interaction, large group interaction. And I think we have to sort of align those same practices that we do in a classroom to the virtual world.
Okay, we'll come back to those small steps in a minute. I want to get a little more granular on that, but I want to bring Christine Lang into this conversation. And also, I think I gave you a promotion, Christine, or I know you left a note that said you are the former chairperson of the special ed department. So just want to clarify that there. I've spent a lot of time this year thinking about special needs students and how impossible this must be for teachers and for parents. And for my way of thinking, there's been really relatively little written about that. And so what have you seen this past year from the perspective of either teachers or just the learning that is possible for kids with special needs?
Here we go. Okay, I was muted. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
There you go. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate all of the points that Patrick and Theresa and Benjamin have been making. I've kind of been jotting down notes, wishing I wasn't muted, but I guess that was a good thing. But to your point, I think as well as what everyone's saying, there's such a diverse population of students that are neurotypically developing. And similarly, students with disabilities have such a wide range of their own abilities. So when we're talking about their ability to access instruction, we're not just talking about, again, the neurotypically developing student that's struggling to get on, but now we have someone who has clinical deficits with their ability to attend for long periods of time, their ability to multitask. There's a lack of sort of that multisensory approach when we're looking, through a screen. But Theresa's point, it really involves the level of expertise. And Benjamin, as far as the professional development, there are teachers out there who are highly skilled at making this transition. But when we're talking about, and maybe to Benjamin's grade level, students with executive functioning issues, it's hard for them to get to their Zoom class on time. It's hard for them to have all their papers organized. Students that have one-on-one support or small group support, they need to be in the classroom sometimes to get that redirection. When they're home or they have a working parent, they're missing their class or they're missing their papers. Or again, at the higher grade level, there's some serious issues with kids that we mentioned technology confidence, but there's some kids that have low self-esteem issues and confidence issues, and they want to not be on their screen, and they're being forced to have their picture up there when they don't feel comfortable in the first place. And so I think an important piece, besides looking at the curriculum and the academics for students with special needs, and I think this goes for both groups of students, we're looking at a group who are at relatively low risk for COVID symptoms, but high risk for psychological impacts of, some of the things we've talked about as far as, the social isolation, and there's an increase in anxiety and depression and that are coming along with this. For kids that have special needs, those issues are being exacerbated perhaps. And then there are some kids who are neurotypically developing that are now developing these new kinds of issues, from all these things that are stemming from the pandemic. I know that was a long-winded answer, but I think it really does vary. But on the other hand, to talk about the positives, I think we can all agree that most kids are more savvy with technology than we are. Like, I know if you need help with your phone or your computer, you're asking your child. And so that being said, I think the technology piece, they can handle that. Kids with special needs too. They can grab an iPad and they have the passwords reconfigured, the settings undone, and the blocks undone. So I think they're pretty savvy with technology. And I also think there are a lot of applications that do lend themselves to helping students with special needs access some of the content and the concepts that they're trying to learn. But it really all goes back to the teacher and their ability to effectively design and develop and provide that curriculum. Go ahead.
No, I want to say, by the way, I apologize. I can't do anything about the light behind me because it's a sunroof and it's the sun. So I was thinking I had a nice little angel, sort of a halo there. But anyway, I apologize for that. So a couple of questions, Christine. Are there any technologies that you have seen that are especially beneficial for students with special needs?
Sure. And I also want to piggyback on one thing Patrick said that he likes about Zoom and same thing with Google Classroom. I think for students who have trouble with self-advocacy and are worried to raise their hand in class, the chat feature is such a great function for them to be able to write a question to a teacher and not be embarrassed that they don't understand what's going on or things like that. And one other comment that I want to make before I respond to that, I think it's what Theresa said before about processes is just so important. And I'll give a personal example. I have 4 kids and they're all doing, we're hybrid home or vice versa, but I don't want us to overuse these technologies, as Theresa said. So my daughter gets her math test on Google Classroom, like a Google form. We're all familiar with a Google form. And I'm sure we all remember math, right? Like in grade school, you have to solve a problem and you get credit for not the answer, but how you arrived at the answer, kind of to Theresa's point. And so my daughter takes a math test and 30 seconds later, she has the grade. And I was like, how did you already get the grade? She's like, well, it's on the form. I just clicked the answers and, I got a 91 or whatever. And I was like, but how does your teacher know if you understood, how did you show your work?
Right.
I didn't. And I was like, what do you mean you didn't show your work? You don't have to show your work. And so this is being recorded. So but I quickly wrote to the teacher and was like, yeah, I'd love to know, I want to help her understand what she got incorrect. If it's just a simple computation error, or does she not understand the concept? How can I go about helping her with this? And it's kind of like, this is the point that we all need to understand, that while technology is wonderful, we can't let it replace all these processes. And yes, Google Forms is great, and it saves time with grading because you get the answers right away. But we need to look at the learning that's taking place and how students are arriving from point A to point B.
Elena Natecki, you're out there somewhere. Would you unmute yourself? Elena is also from our School of Education. You have a comment in the chat room, and I want you to be able to give voice to that, which is you would have you're more the kind of person who I would have thought would have answered the poll. So go ahead and bring up the issue you brought up in the chat.
Sure. Hi, Edie. Hi, everyone. I did one of these panels early on in the pandemic last April about how to do this COVID learning at home. And then it was all very new. So it's interesting because it was such a different conversation we had, Dr. Amanda Gunning and I, last year. But you know what? I think that in our pre-K, kindergarten, very, very young children, as well as to Christine's point, some of the special needs populations, I don't think this is realistic with the virtual, at least not 100% of the time. And my concern in working with pre-K, with our teachers and also doing some professional development and my own children and things like that, I just, I remember being trained as a teacher and being told kids under the age of 6 really shouldn't have excessive screen time. And now they're in front of a computer for 6 hours a day. So I guess my question is, if you're a teacher of early childhood, and this is something I've been working with my students on all year, if you're teaching preschool or kindergarten, what can you do to balance the screen time with other learning activities when kids are stuck at home?
And who does that fall on? That's probably going to fall on parents, right? Theresa, you want to start on that one?
Well, yeah, I can speak to that, professionally and personally. And, on that point, one thing that we've been reminded of is how much of learning is social. And I think a lot of teachers, and bless the hearts of every teacher for the heavy lift that they have pulled off this year. And I think it's an unintended consequence, for lack of a better phrase, but I think with remote learning, there's an extra emphasis that we want to showcase, just like when we're working from home, we want to showcase that we're working. And sometimes the students are giving more work and less peer interactions. And I've told our clinical candidates, listen, try to really focus. You have to know your content knowledge. You have to know all the pedagogy, but try to really focus on how can you cultivate those peer interactions. And Dr. Natecki is a chair of our department, so we've had these conversations. And listen, it's been a collaborative effort. I unfortunately have a flexible schedule, so I have an older child who is in live learning all day, but it's very different for my 7-year-old. And so fortunately, I'm there to help in between these 15-minute Zooms to help with the guided practice and how to, make sure that she's learning and that we're not just given the assignment or the workboard or the Google Classroom. So yeah, and I'll tell you, there's so much that you can do. So that's why I share that same concern that I don't think it works for every population, and I hopefully don't think it'll replace us in a long-term way, but that we extract from this some of the technology, some of the silver linings, some of the access that we've acquired, and strengthen that and help that to continue to grow. But I don't think this can be all or nothing. I think it has to be a piece of all different elements, which is really what teaching and learning is about anyway. And how can we sort of put that all together and not put everything in a silo, but take all of these teachable moments and the technology and the strategies that we've learned and integrate that to really increase the learning holistically.
So this is an interesting question. This is from Avram Gropper. How would you assess child abuse in a virtual milieu? In as much as that it does fall on teachers to identify that.
I mean, I can't say that I'd be an expert in the area to respond to this, but we wouldn't necessarily see physical physical kinds of things that you might see in the classroom.
Right.
I mean, I have heard of multiple occurrences where teachers are seeing things in the background, let's say, that are alerting or alarming. And, there have been additional, progress towards, let's say, letting their administrator know, and then further investigation to situations. So I think the younger kids are typically not home alone doing this. And we're basically in people's homes when you're doing the virtual instruction. So yes, you might not see the same things that you would in person, but I think being in the house, you do get a sense of a lot that might be going on as far as, what's going on in the background, or what you might, necessarily see right away in the background.
Benjamin, have you seen this at all in your school? Have you, teachers are mandated reporters. So, has this issue come up at all?
It's funny. We've had an increase in like HIVs, from the social media type of things, kids typing away and not thinking about things. We have had instances where we had to call DCP&P. A student might forget to turn off their microphone when they're speaking to a parent. We have a lot of kids who will post up for virtual learning and not realize what's in the background when they're on. So we've done some PD on HIV. We've done some on abuse and actually drug abuse as well. So yes, those things are there, and we've trained our staff to kind of look for those things. But yes, those are definitely things that have been on our radar.
So Patrick, I want to bring you back into this. You are super bullish about Zoom, and let me ask you a specific thing about that. And partially, this is my own problem with Zoom, but it feels to me very one way. Like it could encourage a lot of passivity. You could just sit there and let a teacher go on and on and on, or maybe throw up a visual for you to look at. But you were talking about chat rooms and how things are. How do you make it be interactive so that it's actually engaging and not just a one-way street?
Well, the same thing could happen in a classroom. Students could be looking out the window and you would have the same sort of issue then. So I think, and I want to get back to the question that we were discussing earlier also, but how to make it more interactive? Just to monitor it as best you can through the rooms, and to have questions. To plan questions ahead of time is the best way if you're monitoring something, and to have follow-up questions to students in polls or however you're doing that. That's one way to sort of maintain attention. If you want to see if your students are maintaining attention. So if that, I guess that's my answer to that particular question. I'm bullish on Zoom because, as Theresa said, it's a vehicle, it's an adjunct to learning, and it's not the teacher. And when computers started, they are not the teachers. The teacher is the person who does the instruction, not the computer. The computer is the adjunct, or in this case, the technology is the adjunct. It does have a lot of advantages, and I think it has a lot of advantages, and it has a lot of disadvantages. But let me just say something else. The whole issue, all these issues that we're talking about, and this is going to sound like I'm avoiding any kind of a question, but these are also social issues. These are not just issues that can be solved within the education world and the power of the education community. David Berlin has said years and years ago, who's an educational sociologist, he said, you can't solve the education problems without involving the communities, without involving the social groups, without involving the economic issues. So a very broad answer to the question is, if enough money is apportioned to schools to help kids catch up and to educate parents, and that is certainly one way to, and it sounds like I'm avoiding the answer, but it's one way to help solve the problem. Especially now, in my opinion, with the new initiatives by the new president, I think a lot of that can help in terms of the broadband, money going to broadband. That is very important. It's not immediate, but it's very important. And that'll help Benjamin and help everyone in the schools, reach those kids and help those kids and help those parents. I mean, I would have workshops for parents. I involve parents into the community, and you have to understand that parents are working, they're doing this and that, and they may not have all the time you'd like them to have. So it's a very, very, very complicated issue, and it's fair to ask educators what they could do to resolve it. But I think the combination of technology and the hybrid learning and a well-planned lesson, once again, becomes very important. And I think it's also important, and you talk about teacher self-efficacy, that students receive positive feedback for what they're doing so that they can develop a sense of self-efficacy, which means a competency of feeling of efficiency about yourself doing a particular task. I think that's very important. Then that can also be, as Christine, I think, said, be built into the chat. And some programs offer that immediate kind of feedback to students and providing positive feedback to them. So it's a very, very, very complicated issue, becoming more complicated now as a result of COVID.
So, Gabriella, I see you in the room, and you are a former Mercy student, I see, and you're a special educator teaching, and you're teaching right now. Can you unmute yourself? I mean, I hate to put people on the spot, but I'm like dying to hear from people who are actually like teaching kids. And
I got it. Yeah.
Tell me about your experiences, like in the trenches, and what age do you teach, and what are you going through?
Okay, so first of all, I'm happy to see some of my former professors. I gotta say that I learned a lot from them. Professor Quackenbush, you've been amazing. I gotta say it. I always try to follow that, what I've been learning in Mercy, and I carry that. And I'm very proud to say that I'm actually pursuing my bilingual extension, starting in September, and I see Mary Ellen there, and I'm very excited. So right now, yes, so I teach, I'm a special education teacher, and I teach in the DOE, I teach in District 10 in an ICT setting. So it's a third grade.
Now, what's ICT, by the way? I just don't.
Well, it's the integrated co-teaching.
Okay.
It is the integrated co-teaching where you have a gen ed and then you have a special ed. So we're both teach in the same class.
In the same classroom. Okay, fine.
Right. So, based and listening to what you're saying right now, I can say that, this is my first year teacher. I graduated last May. And believe it or not, I feel that I already graduated as forever because I have learned so much. I got to tell you, and I have to say it, if it wasn't because of my background, and I got to say it, my background knowledge, that was the foundation. And I have to say it like that, I would have been like, wow, right now, because I had to jump into hybrid. I had to jump into online. I mean, right now we came back 5 days a week in person in the Bronx. I teach in the Bronx, and I gotta say that, number one, based on my students and based on my community and the community that I am, I don't see a lot of them integrated. I don't see a lot of them computer savvy, and that's an issue. That's an issue. We're talking about socioeconomic, and this is the reality. And I have to say it. Where I have students that are really smart, but they don't have the resources. And there's like 100 more students like them waiting for an iPad.
So what do you do about, what realistically can you do about that?
Help them. I used to go and make copies for them. Like I used to go and in my personal case, I had to deliver it in the house. Believe it or not, yes, believe it or not, I went above and beyond for my students. I teach right now 10 students, and then the rest are online, right? But that's 100% remote. So right now, it's like you have to find a way of how to go. Because number one, they don't have the resources. Number two, they don't have anyone to stay like at home and assist them. And I know that was one of the things that I think Benjamin said. You don't see attendance. And that's an issue right now. So see, it's about, and I do agree with Benjamin, like technology is accelerated, but right now I don't see that technology it's equal for everybody. Many, especially in the community that I am, in the school that I am, it's a Title I school. So I feel that right now it's the lack of resources. Everybody's in the same waiting list, waiting for an iPad, believe it or not. And they can't attend. They can't attend because they don't have anybody who can buy a computer for them, or they don't have any resource for them, or they don't have a Wi-Fi, which is something different, like the internet provider. So I have some of my students saying to me, can you just please make a copy of it and make like a booklet? So that's how I've been teaching with my students. I make booklets.
And you're taking it to them.
I'm taking it to them. Me and my coworker. So we have done so much. And right now, believe it or not, I'm also working as a SETS teacher, which my principal right now, she's been very nice. She's been very supportive. And I'm doing RTI, which is.
What's RTI?
Okay, the responsive, right? When you teach a student, the students that are behind, I just give them like extra support. It's just like an extra support. We call it like that. So, yeah, right. So I do that after school. So my days is like full.
I guess so.
But we do that in person. I do that in person. So right now, unfortunately, this is kind of like the big reality when they don't have, like half of the class have an iPad, but half of the class doesn't have any iPads.
Right.
So how do you do that? That's very unequal. So I can just go ahead and say, okay, I'm just gonna score it. I'm just gonna give you a grade, same as my other students. I just can't. I gotta work on it. So what we did is we create booklets. And right now, I think it's much better because we came back in person. So, and I have my students with IB. So I'm supporting them as well. It's just, every way we can. Use every source we can.
Patrick, you want to jump in here?
I did. Thank you very much. I think that what Gabriella just said, Gabriella is an example of those wonderful teachers out there. And we all know a bunch of them all over that will do everything as Gabriella just described, and so wonderful and such a wonderful thing for you to do, certainly. And that's the person you are, okay? Now, what I tell my classes, and this is part of the solution to the problem overall, what I tell my classes is, sure, you learn all this, hopefully, but you're an advocate. You're an advocate for your students. And I tell my classes, and maybe Gabriella, I used to teach in District 10 also, so I know the environment, at least back then, but it hasn't changed much. But you have to advocate. You have to go to the school board. You have to, you have to be loud, and you have to kind of storm the Bastille, if you will. If educators don't do that, they're never heard. They're not heard anyway. So I'm a firm advocate for, I'd like to see teachers go to the school board, say things, say things, talk up. You pay taxes. This is the so-called richest country in the world. Well, maybe yes, maybe no, but look at the mess we're in. Okay, so let's take our money, and there should not be kids that don't have access to the computer while other kids are waiting online. That's absurd. And you have to make a copy booklet from that's criminal. That's governmental malfeasance, if you will. And I know this is being recorded, so if they take me away, it's been nice knowing everyone. But, so the problem, what I'm trying to say is part of the solution to the problem is for teachers to be very, very, very active in school boards and all over the place, and vote for the person at the low level. When it's time for politics, you vote for the person at your community level that will suit your needs, and you run for office also. Gabriella, you should run for office, Thank you.
I want to, there's a question I want to give to both Benjamin and Christine, which is about the collaboration between teachers and counselors. And I'm wondering if counselors are just overwhelmed during this time. Let me just start with you, Benjamin, in your school with your students. What's that interaction like, and what are those challenges?
I think, our counselors are very busy. They're dealing with a lot of different types of crises and supports, and I think a lot more gets thrown on them, more than their job description entails. We do a lot now with INRS, and that the caseloads are huge, especially, since we don't have kids. We have kids who ghost, kids who return to the country that they're from, and all these different other challenging situations that counselors have to deal with. So their job is definitely expanded. And you talk about equity, it's not equitable what they're getting, but that, they're taking on a lot. And sometimes, a teacher doesn't really know how to help a child in a virtual setting, and they're the first point of help. So to answer your question, the counselors are working overtime right now, and the job description has blown up. And it's definitely something that's been really hard to navigate in a virtual setting.
Christine, I would imagine that problem exists sort of on steroids when it comes to kids with special needs, right?
As I mentioned earlier, issues are exacerbated for kids that already had special needs. And then we're seeing such a rise in these clinical diagnoses for kids that previously didn't have any issues that, counselors may or may not have needed to address. And I'm sure Benjamin and Gabrielle see this in the schools. For some kids that are back, it is amazing. We obviously know that we need to be back in school and we can't replace in-person learning. But from a social perspective, and everyone's been mentioning how learning is social, in some situations, yes, they're back and it's amazing, but some kids are with the same group of kids, and in a middle school or high school setting, it's the same girls, the same boys at lunch, at recess. You're not allowed to mix with other kids at different times because of the contact tracing. So for counselors, it's such a challenging time right now as well, because the issues that arise with kids with disabilities and misunderstanding social cues and an inability to understand language and pragmatics and being in kind of the same setting, it's very challenging for them. But then in the same, I keep going back and forth. That also, I have some parents who say this has been beneficial for my child because she struggled with sitting on the carpet. It was too distracting for her. And now she has to sit in one seat and there's less distractibility. So I feel like there's a lot of pluses and minuses depending on each individual child and their needs.
So for a certain kind of child, that works. That works well, even.
I mean, again, there's so many different pluses and minuses. And I think we mentioned, somebody said silver lining, I think it was Theresa, and we would all be remiss if we didn't take the situation and try to look at the positives that we're getting from it. Yes, it's a challenge and it's really not what anybody could have expected or planned, but we really do need to take the things that we're learning and help improve upon our instruction, as well as, the social emotional aspects for kids with and without special needs.
Theresa, I want to ask you the same question I asked Patrick. How do you incentivize kids to be active participants in learning and not passive?
So great. Actually, I wanted to address that. But first, just to add a little bit to what Gabby said, who I'm so proud of, and Patrick and Christine, it circles back to, how do we identify our learners, right? What are their needs? And you'll see a lot of parallels between the classroom environment and the virtual environment. Some of the issues that we see in those two environments might be fueled by different factors, right? There might be external factors fueling that in the virtual world, where if the child's at home. And so I think it's really placed an emphasis on that, is really identifying the needs of our students. And then what Gabby talked about, how do we then provide that? How do we advocate for them? How do we problem solve that? And how do we use what we do, the resources we do have available, and then advocate for the ones that we don't? And, but all that being said, I will say, from my own experience and from anecdotally from what I'm hearing from many teachers, is that I see it myself with students that I've had on campus and I have cultivated a really good relationship with. And then starting last March, I'd have them online, and it's a very different dynamic, somebody that I know really well. So it really does emphasize that layer. So I'm glad that with this hopefully will be a short-term solution with those silver linings. But I did want to address, so with that, we have to do the same thing that we do in the classroom. As Patrick said, we can have a student sitting in the classroom, we're in close proximity to our learner, and we think because they're sitting there and that we're teaching, right, that they're getting it. And we don't know if, especially if it's a child that has minimal behavior, they can look at, I mean, I'll speak for my own child. He'll sit there and you say jump, he'll say, oh, hi, and he smiles at the teacher and he's gone. So I can say that because of my son, and right. And so unless you're doing those checks for understanding those gauges, you're incentivizing them. So what technology do we use now, and how do we kind of differentiate? How do we differentiate virtually, right? So, I look at, some of the things I've used in addition to the breakout rooms. We'll use Flipgrid or Padlet, and we'll do some of these technologies that I'm trying to sound fancy now, Edie, but some of this.
No, well, I'm thinking, if people have questions about some of these technologies, which they well may,
yeah,
maybe they can reach out to you afterwards, and
sure, I'll put it in
a list of these things that probably it would be good that people knew.
Yeah, and so we'll do some live polls. I'll run some easy polls during easypolls.com during the class. I'll say, you try to gauge your learners, and you have to develop those individual relationships. So you follow up with individual Zooms or small group Zooms, and the same way that you do it in the classroom where you differentiate your instruction, but it's an ongoing cycle of assessing to inform your practice, right? Revise. But we've had to recapture that virtually. And we have to really admit and recognize, with all of like I said, the silver linings that have come from this, it is an arduous process, and it's part of our deliberate practice, right? Our purposeful planning, all of these wonderful terms that we hear of in teacher training. How does that practically transfer in your classroom, whether it's physically or virtually, to establish those connections? So I think that this pandemic has allowed us to step back and not take this for granted that, I've been teaching for 10, 15 years. And I told one of my teachers the other day, I said, the second that we say we're awesome, you're no longer awesome, because that's the antithesis of good teaching and what it looks like. So it's been a lot of learning.
We only have a couple minutes, but Benjamin, I want to come to you again. I want to know what happens in the front office with parents. When parents come to you and they say, I just know my child is falling behind, or this doesn't work. Other than saying you're right, what can you say to them? PTSD there, but
what do I say to them? I'll say, hey, let's take a look. Let's see if we can offer different types of resources. Maybe there's an intervention that we can supply for the students. We try our best to provide some kind of intervention and resources that we may have. But to be honest with them, they're right. And like I said at the beginning of this presentation, virtual learning has a lot of gaps and a lot of holes. And one of the things that we've been trying to tell our parents is, we're really looking forward to coming back to a hybrid setting. So at least I can put that carrot out there, but it's a challenge.
Now you're going back in the fall to what? Do you know?
Most likely hybrid. And
will that mean like in person and online simultaneously, or every other day for one group and every other day for, how does that work? How do you see that working?
The goal is to, have lessons that are virtual, and then the practical stuff like labs, PE, interventions, clubs. Those will be the times that the kids come in cohorts to school. So, just maximizing the virtual piece of it and the technology piece. But then, when we have a need for students to collaborate or to be together or to experience something that you can't do with technology, we'll offer those experiences to them.
Okay. All right. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. And so we're at the top of the hour. Patrick Mccabe, Christine Lang, Theresa Quackenbush, Benjamin Soro, thank you so much. No question, we could keep going. And I want to do a special shout out to Gabriella too, who is such a great reflection on Mercy College and on our School of Education. It's really sort of heartwarming to hear you talk about what you're doing. Absolutely, thumbs up. Do you see that? Thumbs up. See, I don't know how to do thumbs up, by the way, in Zoom land. So there you go. And look at all. Everybody is very good at this. Anyway, we will be putting this up. If you have more questions, you can send them to us and we will get them to the right people and make sure they get answered. And we want to thank everybody for being with us and hope you all stay healthy and safe. So we'll say good night and thank you again.
Have a nice night.